Number 45 in the 50 most relevant for 2025, mid-forward Elijah Hewett. He's a name that's already sitting highly in a lot of teams at the moment, either on field in that forward line or floating between the bench and the mid-forward. But who is this West Coast Eagles player? What type of player is he? And can he be the cash cow we need in our midfield and forward lines to really generate that high-end cash, as well as score some valuable points on field? We are going to talk about him and his fantasy potential in this episode of the 50 Most Relevant. Joining me on the podcast, well, I promised you Dylan Alexander, but he's gone full Geelong on me, and unfortunately he's been a late out. A genuinely good reason to. I promise we'll get Dylan in the 50 Most Relevant, though. But we've called in not just a super sub, but one of the favourites here at the coaches panel. It's a little earlier in the 50 than we'd planned to reveal him, but he's here nonetheless. Kane, fresh off the back of doing our keeper ranks. Nice to be talking some salary cap and single season draft with you. Elijah Hewett's a pretty interesting player when it comes to the top 50, isn't it?
Thanks for having me, MJ. Absolutely. Very different to our keeper ranks, but I think that's the beauty of, working through the off season and getting to this time of year when everyone starts, doing their content, getting excited. We start getting training reports. And I think that's where you have to start with Elijah Hewett, is the training report, because unfortunately we didn't see him at all last year. But there is some positive signs as we work into 2025 with him.
Yeah, that's true. Because there's no games last year, there's not a heap of game data or averages we need to roll through, but last season's pain point is the new season's opportunity. And because of it, he's super cheap for us. In at 122K, 800 in SuperCoach, well below some of the top tier, top 5, top 10 sort of rookies that we'd be selecting from the draft tier, despite having that first round draft pedigree. In fantasy and dream team, a little bit closer to that top end tier of kind of the draftees we might be looking at, but still cheap given he's now entering a multiple level season into the AFL. 332K in AFL Fantasy, 281, 400 in Dream Team. No 2024 data to speak of, but he does have some reasonable scoring elements when you think of him as a moneymaker and as a cash cow, not as a breakout or a premium consideration. His best ever SuperCoach score came back in July in 2023. It was an 83 against the Brisbane Lions, while for AFL Fantasy, it was a few weeks later against North Melbourne. It was a 73. Kane, there's a pretty low level of knowledge across the AFL and the fantasy footy landscape about Elijah Hewett. We've known about him as a name because chances are we've had him in our teams more than just this preseason, but taken pick 14 in that 2022 draft, WA local. But really, he's got power and explosive speed. Like, if there is a hard ball get, this is probably one of the Eagles you want to be getting the ball. If there's an opportunity to create separation from stoppage with ball in hand, he's got that turn of speed about him that within 2 to 3 steps, he can create some gap from almost anyone in the league. And unfortunately for him, injuries have just been pretty cruel to him and the Eagles, meaning we've only really seen a dozen or so games from him over his few years on an AFL list. But there's some power and speed that I really like about Elijah Hewett's game.
Yeah, I think, MJ, that's always the thing, isn't it? When you're a high draft pick, there's always that attention, especially when you're a team like West Coast and, those are the players that you're hoping to take you forward. So I feel like when we saw him in 2023, we were really excited. Obviously, he started his career in the green vest, which, is a good and a bad thing in a way. We get those little spurts and it's a nice way to ease him in. But I think where we got a bit excited about him was in that back end when he played, 10 games in a row to end the season. He was in the midfield from the jump. And I think that's the thing that when we're projecting forward to 2025 is super encouraging. Even in his least centre bounce attended games, he was getting 30% and he even got upwards of 60%. So for me, that just says if he's in the team, and I think he's in the team if he's fit, which obviously we'll know that by the time we're locking in these decisions, but he's going to be a midfielder that's at the centre bounce. And I feel like, as you mentioned with his traits, he did show stuff to the eye. Even if the scoring wasn't quite there, some of the stuff he did on field, you go, this translates to AFL level. So that's what's really encouraging. Again, coming just off our keeper series, we know we love talking about pedigree, and And that's something with Elijah we can't really talk to as glowingly as some other players. He was playing waffle footy as an under-18 player, which we know always brings down the scoring playing against men, but there's probably not those ball-winning traits that we've seen with a lot of other, rookies that come in and burst onto the scene. But at the same time, having this been his third season, as we all know, been around a footy club in that elite environment, even if you are injured, you are developing those habits. So I think he's a guy that if he just can get on the park, there's a massive opportunity in this West Coast team, but in particular in that centre bounce midfield. So a lot of his positives, MJ, are also his negatives. That's the hard thing with him, is we've seen flashes, but there's the injury. There's opportunity, but we just don't know. So you feel like to the eye there's something there. We just would love to see a couple more glowing preseason reports, and obviously massive watch on this whole West Coast team as we move through the preseason.
So true. Like Syndesmosis injury during the preseason last year, and just that foot injury, he just couldn't get it right. And just time and time again, no matter what he seemed to do and the West Coast Eagles fitness staff tried to do, he just couldn't get himself up to AFL level last year. We did see, as you mentioned, some moments in 2023, like that average of 46 in 2023 for AFL Fantasy looks bad. But again, a lot of subs. You go underneath the surface. There is 6 games of 60 plus, including that 73. SuperCoach, an average of 45. Again, getting under the surface. We got 5 games 60 plus, including that PB 83. Like I look at this game that he had where he ultimately got the rising star in around 20 of 2023, 20 disposals, 3 marks, 3 tackles. He goes only a 67 across the formats with that. But to get a 67 from a guy that is a rookie in those first 5 to 8 weeks of the season, where you got any, depending on your structure, 4 to 8 rookies on field, like genuine rookies in their price point, you're getting a 67. You're going, that's a win. I am taking this as a win. And so we do need to lower our expectation rate of what he could be. Now, if he goes above that, that's fantastic. But you mentioned, man, this back run of the year last year, when he gets this opportunity at centre bounce, we are seeing a player that's capable of going mid-50s across the formats with the potential of some 70 and 80 type scoring elements. You get one of those 70s or 80s in the first few weeks of that price cycle movement, well, all of a sudden you're away to the races. And now he's going to actually make you some of that money that you need. To me, I want to pick up on that interesting point that you mentioned, though, around this West Coast Eagles midfield. He got centre bounce opportunities, and that's really where he should be playing. That is the style of player he is, a clearance specialist, powerful athlete, strong at the contest, hard-edged midfielder, loves to win the footy. But I look at this West Coast midfield, and I am a little bit concerned that the archetypes that they've got here feel like they're missing a few dimensions through their build. Like just looking at who'd be hitting their centre bounce, it was a clear centre bounce 3 last year. It was Reed, it was Yo, it was Kelly, and then it was Daylight. There was just nothing really else worth considering through there. Reed, a generational talent, going to be an absolute star of the competition without any question. But clearance, power, speed, these are the terminologies you think with him. Yo probably lacked a little bit of speed, as he's lost some confidence in his body, but still powerful, clearance, hard edge, brings some tackles. Kelly's kind of an accumulator. I wouldn't say he's the pure 30, 35 possession guy. He's much more an assassin type that's got some smooth skills and a little bit of speed about him, but not your pure accumulator type. And then thrown into the mix, you've got like Graham, who they've got as a free agent. Jinby did get some centre bounce opportunities. He's moved into the halfback, it appears. And now you're throwing an Elijah Hewett, let alone what Bo Allen's done at the draft, which, again, I think was the right choice by the Eagles for what it's worth. I just feel like the archetype of this midfield feels heavily balanced towards contest, clearance, power, and not much else. And unfortunately for Elijah, he's just probably the third version of what Reed and Yo are. So how they manage this midfield mix, to me, is a little interesting, more so than concerning, I would say.
Oh, 100% MJ. I think all those guys you mentioned there, you think of it, Tim Kelly, when he's at his best, he's a goal-kicking midfielder. Like, you'd much rather him have the mid to low 20s and be creating scores and kicking goals himself. Obviously, Yo and Reed are super, super powerful, obviously at different ends of their career, but they're both really good aerial players for midfielders. So, yeah, you'd love a guy in there that's can really just hunt the ball and be that really aggressive ball magnet. Elijah doesn't really have that in the history of his game. He feels like another guy that has that burst to get out of stoppage. So 100% MJ. The mix here is so fascinating. The best thing for Elijah is the team he's in, right? Like, if you want an opportunity to seize a midfield role, like, I'm looking at some of the guys that got opportunities sort of as that fourth midfielder. Basically, in the first half of the year, it was Ruben Jinby getting anywhere from about 30 to 70% midfield. And then you look at the back end, a guy like Zane True is getting 40%. So there feels like there's this massive void. And it feels like, there's a chance as well with West Coast to go, let's give these guys maybe that little bit of extra time to develop and use these older guys like a Kelly, a Yo. We know a Duggan's there as well as a senior player that can play in the midfield if needed. Plus you throw in guys sort of in their prime in a Graham and a Baker. I think there's a lot of moving pieces that can play elsewhere and allow Elijah Hewett, if his body can withstand it, to be a 50 to 60% centre bounce midfielder, because that's where I see his game. He might not have the time on ground. Again, we'll see how he goes in this preseason. Obviously, it's really tough when you've missed as much time as he has, but there feels like there's this golden opportunity that if he can just be on the park, he can be that impactful midfielder that's just hunting the ball, hopefully be a high points per minute guy, and get him on, get him off, make sure he's having an impact. Not a guy that at this stage of his career can play, 80, 85% time on ground, rest in the forward line, do all those things that we know these uber elite midfielders of the competition can do. I think with him at the moment, even if you just saw him in that 65, 70% time on ground and he's playing mid when he's on, I think that's the pathway where it can be a really, really good pick. Because as you mentioned, MJ, in the price point, where he's going up against first-year players in the competition. So a guy that in his first season, yes, it was only half a season, but in the back end was basically producing mid-50s. It's only a 5-10 point increase, but it's actually a really good pick. Isn't it funny, MJ? Yes, we've had these uber rookies that have almost reset our expectation. Guys like Harry Sheasel, Dacos, McKercher in recent times that have going 80, 90 plus, Will Ashcroft another one, and you go, like, I'm carrying these guys deep into the season and I'm happy with them, even if they slide to the bench in some cases. So that's ridiculous. But we do know, even if you're touching the 60s in your first year, that's a really, really good effort. So for Elijah to be just shy of that in his first year, at the back of 23, we're now in 25. It feels like it's a bar he can definitely clear, especially with this opportunity. Not many first-year players would get that opportunity. Elijah's obviously in his third, but just the makeup of this West Coast team, there feels like there's a massive pathway. But we've got a lot of watching and a lot of track watching and a lot of pre-season watching and seeing how does this puzzle come together, because we haven't even got to, MJ, the point that they've got a new coach as well.
So much is going to change. We know a new coach comes into the system. They do have their favourites. Now, for McWalter, a couple of those favourites have come over. One through the trade mechanism in Baker, the other as a free agent in a Jack Graham. But you just think they've clearly, by going a mini McWalter, they're taking that pressure valve off. We know we're in a rebuild. We've committed to the rebuild, but now we're going to allow a new coach to develop this team the way he likes. I can see Hewett sitting into that sort of 50-50 midfield split, and a lot of that other 50% is going to be more bench than resting forward. And that's as much about skill set as it is about playing to his strengths, which is explosive power, that damaging speed that he can bring, and just building confidence for him back in his body when you've only played 14 games of a potential almost 50. There is a pressure valve and a pain point to work through with that. So to me, I'm pretty confident that he's going to get that opportunity. The question to me is around how this dynamic sits or splits. I think the other element to it, Kane, you've alluded to the McWalter piece, and we've talked about that, is when we look at the forwards that we can select that are in and around that basement price, we do want players, much like we do with our forwards. We want guys that are going to get midfield opportunity. That's where we think, or that half-back role. That's where that scoring component is going to land over the past few years. But the rookies that we are considering outside of Elijah either have some undefined positions or they've got really unfavourable to fantasy positions. Joe Berry, Isaac Kako, small forwards. A 50 feels like a ceiling game for them most often. Dan Curtin, another really popular name. Positionally, could probably be anywhere from half-back, wing, half-forward to a centre-bounce mid. So we just have a lot of instability of confidence about scoring, whereas, as we've talked about through this episode, Elijah's getting centre-bounce opportunities from year one. That's where he's been at his best. And he's priced at a range that there's just no risk that even a 50-odd with the potential of the most stable midfield role of all, even without the accumulation of heavy ball, I still think he's a really popular option and understandable. So the biggest concern is that lack of availability. That, alongside of your scoring ceiling, are the two key, one wood, two woods that you need from a fantasy rookie, isn't it? Just scoring pedigree, he's okay. Availability, a little bit of a concern, because no availability, no gameplay, no ability to generate cash regardless.
100% MJ. And that's, as I said, that's why it's hard with him, because the positives are the negatives. If he was shooting the lights out, we'd have to pick him as a premium. But he's a rookie for a reason. I think, as you mentioned, it's really important is the draft class we haven't lucked into any of these big mid-forward types. I think people thought maybe a Harvey Langford we might get as a mid-forward. So it's sort of fallen Elijah's way that his relevance has just risen by the crop he's competing against. So I think he's a massive watch, and it does feel like there's a path for him that a lot of our cash cows don't have, that he really could be, a 70 plus. And if you're going to do that in the forward line, you're more than happy to hold on to that for a while. And, obviously in that midfield role, there's always a chance at a spike game too. So at this point, early Jan, it feels like he's the guy that you put there. And if someone comes up and trumps him, or if, we get a lot of rookies in other lines and you've got the cash to spend up, great. But I think for an early Jan pick, with all the info we've got at this stage, you can see why he's a pretty popular guy to have, as a rookie on field or even on the pine, depending on how you're structuring up. It just feels like it's a placeholder that doesn't feel like a placeholder for just the sake of it, as in the price. It actually feels like, what? This could be a guy that come March is in my actual starting team.
Yeah, it's a name that's going to be there, and injury, and let's hope it doesn't happen for not just our fantasy community's sake, but ultimately for Elijah and the Eagles. If he plays round one, it does feel like he's the kind of guy we're going to have in our starting squads for sure. Draft days, well, interesting is probably not fair. I think he just goes straight to the waiver wire. Kane, I don't see a world, even in a keeper, to be frank, unless it's a deep keeper, and I'm meaning like squads of 30 plus, are you considering him? Because I think his ceiling is a 60s sort of guy. I'm happy to be proven wrong, but a low 60s forward, you're scooping that up off the player pool every single week and streaming for options. So I just don't think he's draft relevant across any of the platforms, and I just don't see anyone picking him up, barring him going 70, 80 in the first week or two, and you try to flip him. I just don't think he's draft relevant this year.
Yeah, and the one I could see, MJ, is that, these are the types that you often do throw a dart at late and go, I just want to watch the kid that has the mid-roll. The bar is so low in the forward line from a draft sense that, as you mentioned, yes, we do love to stream and pick matchups, but it might be someone where you go, you know what, and I'll use Tex Walker as an example. So I know what I'm getting from Tex is that forward that could pop on a matchup. I might just have a look at Elijah Hewett and just see if in the first month there's maybe something there that greater than we thought. And then you can always go back to the waivers. So he's probably just competing against those guys that we think, you know what, this guy's going to be owned by 8 different people throughout the league because he's going to be in a team one week, drop to the waiver the next. Maybe you just go, if there is some midfield opportunity as we near draft time, I'm just going to have a look. I'll give him a first 2-3 weeks to have a look and see if there's anything there. But I'm talking very late. Like, I'm talking, you basically sort out the rest of your team, and in your final couple picks, throw Elijah Hewett on you as your bench forward or even second bench forward, and just see what's there. You're really just panning for gold. But yeah, MJ, there's no confidence where you're going, I'm going to try to structure my team to get Elijah. I think it's going to be more of a pleasant surprise and something you luck into late, or you grab off the waivers if you do see something more.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. All right. That's it. Number 45 of the 50 most relevant, in the can and done. A rookie that's in many of our sides at the moment. Risk of injury is the only real reason you're fading, alongside the other reason of, do we get an overwhelming buffer of these forward rookies that come out that just kind of push him down the order? If he's fit, I think he plays. And I think if that happens, we're probably going to start him at least somewhere in our starting squads for 2025. Hey, mate, as always, a pleasure talking fantasy footy with you. Tell you what, come back tomorrow and do it again, will you?
Sure. No worries, MJ. Anything. Great. I'm the sub.
Done. He's in. Oh, we actually paid for you on this one. That's totally fine. If you want to go and check out any of the other players we've revealed so far in the 50 most relevant, you can go back on this very channel. Go back and check them out. Pre-season is well and truly underway here at the Coaches Panel. If you haven't subscribed to the audio podcast, make sure you do so and give it a 5-star rating. It's just that little small thing you can do that actually makes a really important difference for us here at the Coaches Panel. We've also got the videos lining through every single episode. And if you are watching this on YouTube, make sure you subscribe, give it this video a like, and comment below. Let me know, what do you think the scoring potential of Elijah Hewett is going to be, and how this Eagles midfield mix actually looks like. Right at the top of the podcast, Kane alluded to a Keeper Ranks series that we did. If you love to play keepers or a dynasty league, this series is for you. If you join our Patreon, you get immediate access to that at any tier, at any level. Once you're in, you will get access to that. It's our top 50 players ranked into 8 tiers. You can go and check that out. And while you're there, if you become a breakout or a premium tier supporter of the Coaches Panel, you actually get the audio podcast the day early. So you can be ahead of the pack, as well as a bunch of other rewards that come your way. So number 44 in the 50 most relevant. You ready for a clue? He's a perennial 90s averaging player. There's been some moments where he's hit that 100 marker in at least one of the formats, but he's always sits in that 90s average. And look, for a midfielder, a 90s average in Classic, you just don't want any piece of, do you? Well, in 2025, you might, because he's not priced at a 90s. Who is this guy that offers potentially incredible value for us in 2025 and could end up becoming a premium option that we hold for big chunks, if not all, of the season? You'll find out tomorrow in the 50 most relevant.